Been looking forward to joining you today, and before I dive in to tell you about regenerative leadership, I would like to invite you into closing your eyes. I'll do the same, so you don't worry about me staring at you while you have your eyes closed. So sit comfortably. If you have your legs crossed, uncross them. And just settle into the seat and into the room. And just tune your awareness into how your body is feeling this very moment. How are you feeling? Do you feel sore or tense anywhere? Do you feel tired? Excited about the weekend coming up? What kind of emotions are alive in you right now? What we will do now is we will create a little gift to ourselves. I would like to invite you into creating a space where you could always go to regain your strength, your vitality, your health. So start by, in your minds, taking your shoes off, and wriggle your toes, and now create the most delicious surface for you to walk on. You are the designer in this little exercise. So create whatever surface you would like to walk on. And then in your mind, start walking. Put a smile on your face. And then start to go towards a place that has all the conditions that you need to feel alive. Think about what kind of lighting you want, what kind of atmosphere you want, what kind of surroundings make you feel the most alive, calm, and give you the space to regenerate. What sounds are in your space? And then find somewhere where you could sit on the ground, sit on the floor, whatever your surface may look like. And then lean up against something. And what is that something that you lean up against? And what are you now looking at? Create the kind of surroundings that make you feel calm and alive and part of something bigger. This space has everything that you love. So you can't help but putting a big smile on your face. This is a place you can always turn to whenever you need to regenerate or just kind of draw a little bit of energy. Maybe doing a busy day. You could always go here to this amazing place and just feel a bit rejuvenated. You now stand up again and feel free to do that in this theater if you feel like it. And do a bit of stretching if you feel like it. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I would like to know, by show of hand, how many of you designed a space that had elements of nature in it? I think 100%, maybe 99.7. So hold that thought. What I would love to tell you about is the dawn of the regenerative era, with a focus on how we lead and how we create thriving organizations geared for the 21st century. But let me just start with why we actually need regeneration and why this is really starting to become a buzzword on a global scene. I mainly work on an international level, but moved back to Denmark this summer. And internationally, especially in Germany, the UK, and the US, regeneration in terms of how we do business is really starting to gain traction. And it's also kind of blossoming a bit here in Denmark. So I'm excited to talk to you. I think most of you are probably Danes, I don't know. And so why are these big corporations suddenly interested in regeneration? And why do we see companies from PepsiCo to Walmart to Danone and others suddenly starting to talk about regenerative business and all the great things that they do towards that? And I say great things with a touch of irony, because there are many of those companies that I would not call regenerative. But that's part of new movements, that all the big global giants are also starting to pretend that they are regenerative. But it's a good thing that they talk about it, and it's important that we have this discussion on an international and national level. So, but let's zoom out to look a bit upon the landscape that leaders of today are navigating, because it's an exciting time to be alive, but it's also a challenging time. And we have in many ways never been in a situation or in a point in time where we have had as many challenges and complexities to deal with at the same time. And some of these challenges are quite severe, and you may be really fed up talking about them, but I'm just kind of running you through them very quickly, because it is part of our reality, and it is part of the major reason why we need a regenerative focus. Because we are living through the sixth mass extinction. In only a few decades, we have eradicated 72% of the flying insect population. We cannot live without insects. We would only have 4 years to live if, for example, bees were no longer here. And we have cut 80% of our natural forest. We have depleted our soil, so it's now very fragile. It also means that we only have 60 harvests left. And we soon have more plastic in our oceans than marine life. We are in the midst of planetary collapse. And I totally understand why many people are fed up talking about this, because what does that mean in terms of my agency? Does that mean that I need to kind of think about my purchases and whether I fly, etc.? Yes, it does, but it also means that we need to change the way and the concept we have towards leadership, and how we see ourselves as leaders, and how we see ourselves as stewards of transformation, and how we need to be reconnected with the greater interconnected web of life that we are a part of, and that sustains our life on this planet. This year, economists, for the first time, it was a study issued by the British government, and it was a study done by, I think it was around 600 economists, that was calling for radical and urgent change, that was saying we need to radically reinvent how we measure growth. GDP is a model of the past. We need to ensure that nature is embedded in the way that we measure GDP and similar figures. And we also talk a lot about that we have been through since the 1950s, the Great Acceleration. So everything from CO2, transportation, population, etc., has been on the same steep increase. But what is always lacking from these discussions, and I have been working in the field of sustainability since I was an 8-year-old and started campaigns to buy up money to buy pieces of the Amazon forest. I've worked as an environmentalist in the Amazon, but I have also studied business both in Copenhagen and London, and spent the past 15 years creating organizations within the field of sustainability, innovation, and business. So I've been to a lot of conferences talking about sustainability or climate change and the responsibility of business. And what is always lacking is in this discussion is, does anyone have a great suggestion? What do you think is lacking from these images, or what we measure when we talk about the Great Acceleration and the root cause of our current friction? It's the fact that stress and mental illness has been on the exact same steep increase since the 1950s. And this is just numbers from Denmark. 12% of our population are currently deeply stressed and burned out. And that's a major problem, and to me that's the same problem. It's an interconnected crisis we are in the midst of. And let me just talk a bit about brainwaves without it being very detailed. These are the different kind of brainwaves our minds can be in. And regular beta is the brainwave state we are in when we go about our day. And then from an evolutionary point of view, we have this genius brainwave that is called high beta. And high beta means that all our energy flushes to our minds. We get tunnel vision, but we also get access to crazy intelligence that can help solve a critical challenge in that moment in time. When we're in that state, we cannot think holistically. We cannot think outside the box. We only have focus on what's immediately ahead of us. We also cannot access compassion and empathy. And the challenge is that 98% of executives in the US, for example, 98% spend the majority of their day in high beta, and I think it's pretty much the same numbers for Denmark. That's a crazy big challenge that we have, but it's never talked about because it's still surrounded by a lot of taboo that we are actually burning both our inner and outer ecosystems. We are too stressed to think outside the box, and what is needed now more than ever is our ability to think outside the box. And we need to stop doing what we have always done to solve the challenges that we are in the midst of, because this crisis is interconnected, and therefore we need a holistic approach, and we need to dare have a conversation where we talk about all of these issues at the same time, and where these issues are also addressed in the boardroom, and where we as leaders also dare take all of these things into account in the way that we lead and in the way that we do business. Because right now our reality is that the most intelligent primate on this planet is deliberately destroying our own health, vitality, our ecosystems upon which we depend. It's insanity. If you dare just kind of take a step back, it is insanity. And the way that we have addressed this is we continuously talk about new political agreements. We've just had the Glasgow COP26. I stopped taking to COPs. I stopped with COP16 in Cancun. I was very much involved before that, but I've just given up because it's a bit of a circus, and they say the same things over and over again, and it's the same people that meet over and over again. This is not how we're going to solve this. And then we talk about technology transfer, and technology transfer is also incredibly important, but it's not going to cut it either. What is going to cut it is a courage to radically think outside the box and radically reinvent how we go about problem solving, how we radically go about how we are human beings, how we are stewards of this magnificent planet that we are fortunate to call our home. So we need a holistic, interconnected approach, and we need to radically step up our game when we talk about how we lead and how we do business. And we need to radically educate ourselves in new ways, because this is not things that we've been taught. I was not taught how to run organizations that were also ensuring great health for both inner and outer ecosystems. No, not at all. So there's a major competency gap. 50% of global executives don't feel equipped to lead in the world of today, and I think that's a massive problem. And I think the number is actually higher, because this is the curious executives or the courageous executives that dare admit that they don't feel equipped to lead in the world of today. So this is the challenge, and this is going on again and again and again. We keep talking about business the same way. We keep talking about business as we were still in the 20th century. I studied, I decided to go on a course, a 2-week intensive executive education at Harvard. I shouldn't have mentioned the name, but an Ivy League university. And the course were called Global Leadership for the 21st Century. And that was while I was putting the finalizing thoughts on the books and the frameworks. So I think I need to go to the very best in the world to study what their approach. And I felt like that woman on the right-hand side. I felt like they kept talking about value chain analysis and Gantt charts and how to cross competitions and KPIs, and I was just like, but there was no mentioning of any of the things that I've just talked about. No mentioning at all. And this was a study, or this was an education that were equipping so-called young global leaders of the world, and that was why I was there. So we was part of a program organized by the World Economic Forum. But it was in no way prepping us for navigating the world that we are currently living in. So there's still massive blind spots, and we keep reinventing what we have done for so long. So these were some of the largest companies back in the 1970s, and in many ways they have shaped our thinking. And we need to start kind of claim it when we see it, this industrial era influenced way of thinking and doing business. Because this era was very much influenced by productivity, efficiency, and this extraction of both natural and human resources. And very control and hierarchically obsessed. And this belief system that you could run the organization as if it was a machine. And you could kind of analyze everything with numbers on a sheet. And that was how you became a great manager and a great CEO. And the way you did organizational design was looking like this. And this is what we see in many organizations today. And the problem is that when you have Janine down here in the right-hand corner, and for the third time, Janine is coming up with a brilliant suggestion, and she's told by her line manager that yes, I can take it up in the committee next month, and blah, blah, blah. And you know the drill, right? I don't even need to kind of elaborate in detail. You've experienced that probably firsthand as well. There's so much human ingenuity locked into these pockets of wisdom, but no one is accessing those pockets. There's so much fear, there's so much scarcity mentality in our organizations of today. So much fear. And we need to address that if we want to lead successfully in the 21st century. These were the top 10 in the year 2000. And many of these companies were also shaped with the 20th century mindset and this very rigid, mechanistic, reductionist, control-obsessed mindset. And 52% of these companies are no longer around. And I believe that a major reason for that is that they didn't see the writing on the wall in due time. They looked at their Excel sheet. These companies didn't look at the writing on the wall in due time. There's a flexibility and a resiliency that we don't have because we are not trained to look at the organization as a living system. And today, most of the organizations are still based on this extractive mindset and this insane idea of how we do business in a great way. It also means that 76% of the global workforce feels disengaged. And what is happening in the US at the moment is what is referred to as the Great Resignation. 14.6 million people have quit their jobs in the past. I think it's a year and a half. And many are pissing their pants because how do we actually handle this? Because we know access to talent pool is a major asset of ours. But the thing is, the next generation, they want to work for a company that actually matters. They want to invest their time, their most precious asset, in something that is bringing about the change that they are desperately craving. 64% of millennials, they want to work for a company that have a dedicated strategy towards being a change maker, a positive activist when it comes to bringing about a more sustainable, thriving world. And this leads us to where we are now. So to the left-hand side, you see the kind of way that most companies are currently operating by, and the reason why we are mainly in the mess that we are in. And then we are probably in the middle right now. SDGs are gaining more and more traction, but where we need to go is to the right-hand side. And thankfully, more and more pioneers are joining the regenerative movement, and I'm fortunate to work with many of those. And they see their company as a living, breathing system. They see their employees as cells of a greater organism, and that organism, all the cells within the organism need to thrive for that organism to thrive. They need to ensure inbuilt resiliency into their organizational design. It's a radical new way of doing business, and it's a business logic that is inspired by nature. It's a business logic that is inspired by the only system that has stood the test of time, which is living systems. And it's, as was said in the introduction, it's that mindset of I am a steward and I respectfully draw on the wisdom of the greatest intelligence that I'm surrounded by. I tap into the 3.8 billion years of evolutionary experience in how I do business, because they understand that doing exponential growth on a finite planet, that is insanity, and we can no longer continue our ways. So they ask themselves, what can we learn from this logic? What can we learn from this logic that has been around since the dawn of time, that consists of mainly, if we boil them down and summarize them, this is the kind of the recipe for how living systems has continued to thrive and evolve and innovate and collaborate seamlessly. And I would like to give you some examples of organizations, but also of these principles, because this logic we have used as the foundation for what we call the regenerative business and leadership DNA. And I'm mentioning this because if all of what I talk about today sounds a bit kind of far-fetched, or where do I start here? Where do I begin the journey? We have tried to make it very simple. So already today you could take an assessment and see to what extent your organization or your community, whatever you want to measure, is regenerative, and where you're doing really well and where there is massive room for improvement. So I'm just going to talk you through the regenerative business DNA, which consists of three main elements. Living systems design, which is all about how do we produce our goods and services. Living systems culture, which is all about how do we create a thriving, abundant culture that has these conditions conducive for life to thrive. And the third element is what kind of qualities, human capacities and qualities do we need to nurture within ourselves and within our employees. So living systems design is covering, for example, circular economy, bio-inspired innovation, biomimicry. And it's that notion that we can really lend from nature's amazing library and their patterns, their forms, their functions, their principles in how we produce our goods and services. It's that notion that in its essence, life is life-affirming. Life is continuously creating the conditions needed for more life to thrive. So when an apple falls to the ground, it's not waste, it's actually delicious nutrients for billions of microbes. And it improves the topsoil. And within it are the seeds for the next batch of production or innovation. So this is how we should design, and thankfully the circular economy is gaining more and more traction and awareness and recognition, and that's all part of this. But we can't stop with a circular economy, because if we only focus on that, it's still that rigid, mechanistic, silo-based approach to life. It's also this notion of how do we actually produce our food that we can also transfer to organizational culture. How do we take care of soil, whether it's dirt soil or whether it's organizational culture's soil? So soil, the real soil that we use to produce food, when you have a very monocultural approach, it means that it can't draw carbon down from the atmosphere. So a lot of carbon is going out into the atmosphere. It also makes the soil incredibly fragile. Whereas when you have a more life-affirming approach, when you are focusing on regenerative agriculture, you are actually storing a lot of CO2, and you are making the soil much more resilient to pests, etc. So you don't have to use fertilizer. And the thing is, to the left-hand side, the more fertilizer you use, every year you have to increase the usage per yield for the earth to kind of keep up and keep producing outcome, which is lacking a lot of nutrients because there's no nutrients in the soil. But we can also directly translate that into our organizational cultures. So are we really locking in human beings under artificial lighting in cubicles and give them a computer and expect them to be incredibly efficient and productive? We are lacking the connection to our natural habitat. We are also just an animal, and we have very little connection and access to our natural habitat. How would we feel like if we treated chimpanzees the way that we treat ourselves? There's a collective craving and longing to be closer connected to our natural habitat. Your mind also immediately went there when we did the little opening exercise. And thankfully studies are starting to keep up, and science are now proving that we heal much faster. Our memories are improved by 50% when we are just spending 20 minutes in nature. It's much more easier to access compassion. It's much easier to collaborate when we spend time in nature. So many of these companies that we work with, they are actually spending a lot of time in nature because it's just make their processes way more smooth and fun and innovative. And a company that I wanted to mention is a company like Interface, and they are ready next year with factories and offices where it feels like walking around in a forest. Both for you as an employee, but also the way they produce their carpet tiles. So Interface is a carpet manufacturer. And their factories are turning sunlight into energy, purifying water, only using regenerative materials. So they want to function like a forest. And they don't stop there. They also have this ecosystemic approach to how they produce their goods and their carpet tiles. So to the right-hand side, you see an image of a Philippine fisherman. And he's being paid by them to fish up discarded plastic nets from the ocean, and they're using that as material in their production. There are many ways where you can become incredibly creative instead of continuously using virgin material. Living systems culture. So how do we create a culture within our organizations where we don't feel we need to wear a mask? Studies show that we spend so much precious energy trying to fit in and trying our very best to not be who we truly are. Again, that's insane. Instead, we should unleash and access our true human ingenuity, and that's where leadership really plays a big role. Because are you providing the conditions for your employees to access their true human ingenuity? Or are you creating the conditions where fear and scarcity, suppression, domination is taking the driver's seat? So life is constantly changing and responsive. That's part of how nature works. And that should also be the mindset in our organizations. Organisms are constantly changing depending on the environment that they are in. And they have these self-organizing properties that we need to learn from in how we do business and how we run our organizations. So we need to see our organizations more as an organism. So when we face external changes in our environment, because of very clear and simple rules, we can quickly change and adapt to our changing environments because of our self-organized ways of being, and I'll come back to that. Because it's all linked to us letting go of the kind of misinterpretation of Darwin, for example. Because we were told that Darwin was kind of praising the survival of the fittest, meaning the survival of the most dominating, excruciating, loudest alpha male. That's at least how I was brought up, that for you to be a success, you had to be incredibly extroverted and loud and have an opinion on everything and speak all the time. To me, that was very overwhelming. You may not think that when I stand here talking, but I'm incredibly introverted, was incredibly shy. And it did something to me, and it does something to a lot of people when you are raised in a society where that's the kind of definition of failure and something you should be a bit kind of shameful about. But he never said that. What he said was, it's not the strongest species that survive. It's not the loudest, it's not the most dominating. It's the species that are best able to collaborate and adapt to changes in their environment. So when he said fit, he meant fittest as in being able to quickly change and respond to changes in his environment. And there are many kind of almost conspiracy theories about why he was so heavily misinterpreted, but it's something you can read about in your own time if that is intriguing. So we need to move in this direction, where instead of spending a lot of time controlling and dominating people and celebrating a very specific way of being a corporate success, we need to move in this direction, where we are celebrating diversity and where we are celebrating these self-organized ways of being. Many of the organizations that I work with are on this journey towards becoming more self-organized. It's not necessarily an easy journey, but it's incredibly fulfilling. It's incredibly fulfilling to suddenly be able to be who you truly are and collaborate in a more genuine, authentic way. I can talk more about that. But it's a process, and it's a dynamic where we are admitting that we too are a kind of a superorganism. Human beings are also a superorganism. We are not the same as bees or ants, but there are similarities. And how can we tap into some of the things that ants and bees are incredibly great at, which is being incredibly resilient and quickly adapting to change? So for example, when an anthill is flooded, in a matter of 30 minutes, they can secure all the eggs, secure the queen, make sure they flow down the river by making a raft, joining together, and they can set up a camp elsewhere. And they have only 17 communication signals or pheromone signals. But they are incredibly aligned. They have a very clear purpose. They have very clear communication signals, but they also have a lot of agency. They trust that everyone in the organism are constantly sensing and responding. Sense and respond is a massive kind of term in the regenerative movement, something we need to celebrate within our organizations, our ability to quickly sense, okay, what's needed here, and respond quickly. Instead of sensing something, probably not my responsibility, because it probably will require extra work if I say something about this, and things are not really addressed, because you also, many places you spend a lot of time arguing what needs to be done, and that's something that we need to let go of if we want to be truly resilient and agile in the 21st century. The principle or the logic of life that is focusing on how everything is related and interconnected is also something that is massively missing in what we were taught in business school and school in general. It has very much been the success of the individual and not the connected whole that has been celebrated. The Austrian physicist Fritjof Capra says it quite visually great, and the way he communicates the importance of strong interconnected relationships is this. So to the left-hand side, you have an image of death, and to the right-hand side, you have an image of life. And the stronger the connections and the quality of the relationship within any living system, the better the living system is at responding quickly, and the healthier it is. And if we take the human body, if there are elements within our body that starts to communicate very poorly, it means that we are becoming sick, and eventually we can die because the feedback signals within our ecosystem is not acting properly. I know you had a session about KPIs earlier today, so I wanted to build that. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here, but it's the same thing when we are rigidly focusing on KPIs. It would be the same as imagining what could often happen when KPIs are actually competing against each other. That's something that I see in many organizations, that there's not a holistic focus on how do we actually have KPIs that is securing the benefit of the whole. So what you see is a lot of internal friction and competition based on the KPIs. And that would be, just as what I've put up here, would be like the KPIs of the heart undermine those of the lungs, or if the kidneys cross the spleen because it saw it as competition. And then you would have inner war in your body. And that is what we see in many organizations. So much stupid energy is being spent on stupid things. We need a whole system approach where we take everything into account in our decision making. And we need to be these ecosystem facilitators that is sensing into the wholeness of our challenges and assessing things and see what is then the right regenerative approach here, and how can I make sure that I take decisions that are creating regenerative ripple effects and not degenerative ripple effects. How many of you have heard about Buurtzorg, the Dutch healthcare provider? A few of you. So allow me to just briefly explain what Buurtzorg is all about, because they are one of the world leading examples or greatest examples when we talk about self-organized successful companies. So they were started in 2005 by 3 nurses who were incredibly fed up by this rigid mechanistic regime in the healthcare industry, where you were given 2 minutes to fix a band-aid and 1 minute to give new medicine, etc. The kind of approach where you're completely taking the human connection out of the picture. And it could just as well have been a robot that you had sent to take care of Mrs. Jensen. They wanted something completely different. They wanted to put human care and love at the center. They wanted to allow their nurses to spend whatever time they wanted with the elderly person they were caring for. And they did not want a rigid mechanistic hierarchy. They wanted a self-organized organism, and they wanted to run the organization like that. So today, Buurtzorg are almost 15,000 employees. They are again and again awarded as the best company to work for in the Netherlands. And how they are run is they're run like a beehive. So they are organized in teams of 10 to 12 nurses, and within those cells, as they call them, the responsibilities and the potential power allocation take turns. So it's not stuck with one individual that has been here for 15 years and therefore should be admired by all the rest. No, they take turn. And within the cells, they can decide when they go on vacation, and within certain rules, how much they are paid, and how much time they want to spend with the elderly person. They have reduced cost with 40% compared to benchmark in the market, and they are 60% more profitable than the benchmark competition. And they have also innovated a lot of spin-off companies within physical therapy, catering, and also IT systems, because they needed a very special IT system. And the way they make decisions is accessing collective intelligence. So constantly via an app, employees can come up with new suggestions, and they do that kind of continuously. And then the management team, which doesn't call themselves management team but more service team, they filter that input, and based on that they prepare their strategy. And it's never a 5-year strategy. It's a rolling strategy that is constantly tuning into the changes in the market. So when the strategy is ready, they announce that, and then they again receive collective input. And that means that the strategy is not just developed by a few human beings that consider themselves more clever as the rest of the organization, but it's co-created and thereby accessing all the human ingenuity within that organism. And many organizations are now inspired by Buurtzorg's way of organizing. Then we have the principle about diversity and how nature thrives thanks to diversity. And the higher the degree of diversity, the higher the degree of health and vitality in any ecosystem. And a population's ability to evolve successfully also depends on the degree of diversity within that population. That's something we have known for a very, very long time, yet we see a lot of lack of diversity. It's something that is being discussed a lot, and that's a good thing, and I think many executives recognize the importance of diversity, yet again, they approach this theme with a very rigid mechanistic approach where, okay, how can we just ensure a certain number or percentage and we are good to go? It's about creating a culture where we honor diversity. And what do I mean by that? I mean, for example, in permaculture, I've just spent a year living on a permaculture farm in Portugal. And in permaculture, we have this concept of edge effects. And edge effects are those effects that we need to create where cultures are colliding and where we have the highest degree of biodiversity and different species coming together. But it does create a bit of a clash, and that goes for human cultures as well. So when people of different backgrounds are coming together, it can create a lot of tension and a lot of friction, and we are not taught how to hold space for that friction. So it can feel a bit unpleasant, and many of us are shying away from accessing the true potential of diversity. And many executives feel more comfortable hiring people with the same educational background as themselves, because then they know what they will get, and also because subconsciously they might not be challenged as much. Many company cultures are still very much shying the odd ones out, but that's something that we need to celebrate if we really want to get ahead and innovate in a proper sense, and holding space for that diversity by recognizing and not shying away from the clashes that inevitably come when human beings are together, because we are messy human beings. So the third and last component is the kind of qualities that we need to nurture within ourselves and within our cultures for them to feel like places where we can truly breathe and be who we truly are, and where we don't have to spend all that energy on putting on a mask and kind of navigate according to unwritten rules. So that's qualities like true presence. In many of the organizations that I've worked with in the beginning, their meetings feel like chaos, in a way where there's a constant fight for word, and the louder the better, and the introverted are more kind of like, but everyone feels drained from energy and overwhelmed when they leave the meeting, and then they enter the next with the same kind of frictious energy. I think many of you can relate to that meeting feeling like they're kind of sucking all energy out of you. What can we do where we are creating a higher degree of deep listening, a higher degree of authentic presence, a higher degree of silence, a higher degree of allowing everyone to get to say what they truly mean in a way where they're not judged. But also, it's that ability of our companies truly celebrating the cycle of life. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have created cultures, not just in our companies, but in our societies, where we are constantly celebrating the energy of spring and summer, that performance and output-focused energy. And those energies can be fun to be in, but it's inhumane that it's expected that we are constantly showing up in spring and summer energy, executing, delivering, getting great ideas. It's simply not possible. And that's a major part of the reason why so many of us feel stressed and burned out. Because we're depleting our own inner resources, and we have not been taught how to revitalize our inner resources. So let me talk you through this. So in the front loop, that's where you have these incremental, innovative ideas That's where you're really performing, you're in full-on spring, and then you go into summer and you start to prepare for harvest and you start to prepare your outcome. But then it's in the back loop. It's when you withdraw. It's when you allow the deeper, nourishing winter phase. It's when you allow that time for reflection and integration of your learnings. Because we are a delicate living system, and we are never taking out the time needed for integration and reflection, and for our lessons learned truly be absorbed in our system. Which means we're just running around continuously crazy full-on speed. And we need to stop that. And this kind of workflow is something that many pioneering regenerative organizations are using as the model for all their work processes. So even their day should have the energy of every season integrated. And it's something they talk about. It's something they talk about in their meeting. Okay, we have 40 meetings, because the fact that every meeting should just last an hour is also insane. So every meeting lasts 40 minutes in many of the organizations that I work with. And consciously, they are ensuring the energy of every season in those meetings. So they take time for silence and reflection in the beginning. And then it's okay to be brainstorming and being full on kind of spring and summer, but then they need to go into the integration phase. And how do we land on an outcome here? How do we practice deep listening? How do we practice presencing? And what all of these are reporting back is that now they feel they leave the meetings more revitalized than when they entered the meeting. And that's the kind of culture that we want to nurture within our organizations. It's that ability of valuing ourselves as a cyclical being on a cyclical planet, and we need the polarities. We need the polarities of life for us to thrive. It's part of our human nature. Yet we have been taught that there are some of these elements we should shy away from, and that is scary. We've been taught in many ways that the winter, the nighttime, the darkness, where we can actually access the golden nugget of wisdoms. We've been told that that's the scary places, that we should focus more on being in the light in the spring and the summer. So how can we create a culture where we are holding space for the winter within? I realize that I'm talking about a lot of things that to some may be new and overwhelming, and I'm trying to give you a crash course, but of course it's more complex and you can read more in the book if you are intrigued. But the essence is that we need to embark on this transition of rigid mechanistic hierarchies that are sapping our energy into rich living systems full of health and vitality. And we need to see ourselves as ecosystem facilitators. We need to see ourselves as ecosystems facilitators, whether it's these are just 3 examples of ecosystems, a body, a forest, and a city. And the normal intervention when we have, for example, a disease in the body is to give medicine. And medicine is amazing. I'm not saying anything about medicine being bad. I'm only saying that maybe we should dare apply a more holistic mindset as well when we are problem solving in our human bodies. When we come across a challenge in a forest, for example, a pest, we apply fertilizer. And when we have, for example, crime in cities, we lock up people in cities. That's the very traditional mechanistic approaches to problem solving. Whereas the regenerative interventions are looking at the whole system. So if we are solving a challenge in the body, how can we also focus on exercise and therapy, and maybe you need to get out into the sunlight, those kind of things. And how can we work with the forest to regain its natural health and vitality? How can we maybe address crime intervention in a more humane, regenerative way? And we need to see our organization too as a whole ecosystem. And we are the acupuncturists that are constantly detecting where there's a bit of unleashed energy, where's there stress and friction, what can I do to work with the system? So executives need to go outside and need to actually start to sense in to the rhythm of their living system. I was fortunate to meet Jaime Lerner, an amazing Brazilian mayor, back at the Rio Plus 20 summit almost 10 years ago, and he's known for his approach called urban acupuncture. So Jaime became mayor of one of the poorest cities in Brazil, Curitiba. And there's a tradition in that town that the mayor closed the door for 100 days, and with his city officials, he would develop the 5-year strategy, and they would announce it and hold a great party and everything. And he was like, no, I'm doing something radically different. I want to walk around in my city every day for 100 days. I want to be everywhere, and I want to meet all people. I want to sense and smell the music of my city. And he did that, and he went back to his office, and he was like, okay, how can I empower this passionate individual here? How about I put up a bench here? How about I ensure the favelas, the very poor areas, they need to get access to electricity and education? So that was his approach. And he never kind of launched a 5-year strategy. He was continuously working in tune with the system, using his sense and respond capacities. And in 8 years' time, he transformed Curitiba to the poorest city in Brazil to one of the richest. And I think we could be greatly inspired by his approach and how he dances with the system instead of rigidly focusing on executing Q1, Q2 targets, whatnot. So as an ecosystem facilitator, you ask yourself, where are the key nodal points? Where are the acupuncture points in my system that I need to prioritize? Where do I sense unleashed potential? Where are there passionate employees that I need to empower more, give more space and freedom? Those are the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves as ecosystem facilitators. And just very quickly, to give you an overview, this is the detailed version of the DNA model that you could take yourself and your organization through already today. It consists of 17 DNA strands. And if you focus on those DNA strands, you will be geared for the future. I would like to kind of put my head on a, what do you say in English? You know what I'm saying. Exactly. In the regenerative DNA model, there are 2 pulsating rhythms. The leadership dynamics, which is that oscillating energy between being very strongly rooted in yourself, but also having the capacity to understand interconnected systems. So you need to understand your own blind spot, your trauma triggers, all those kind of heaviness. You need to focus on that, because what I see, and what I think many of you probably see as well, are executives that are projecting all kinds of crap out into their atmosphere and in their environment. We need executives that are strongly rooted in themselves, but also have the capacity to understand interconnected systems. That's one key dynamic. And the other key dynamic is the dynamic of life itself, that oscillating energy between divergence, when we are opening up, diversifying input, really experimenting and being in the energy of chaos. But it needs to come with the energy of convergence, where we are consolidating and grounding. And that, when we have the oscillating energy between those 2 polarities, that is when we see emergence of new ideas, of new innovations, of health and vitality. So you can already take the DNA assessment today. There are different questions covering each of the DNA strands, and at the end you will have something like this, which can be a navigation tool in terms of where are we doing really well at the moment, and where do we see there's room for improvement. I hope this has given you at least an introduction into this new amazing field of regenerative business. But the essence is to ask ourselves, how can I align with life? And last but not least, having this awareness around, I'm only here for a limited time. Am I investing my most precious asset, my time? Am I investing that in our extinction? Or in our survival? And maybe you think I sound overly activistic and dramatic, but that is the truth. Thank you.